The fluorescent lights of St. Michael's Hospital flickered as Dr. Evelyn Hart washed her hands, the sterile scent of antiseptic hanging heavy in the air. She never imagined that the very place she dedicated her life to saving others would become a stage for a chilling puzzle. As she donned her surgical gloves, the whispers of her colleagues echoed in the hallway, each word a weight added to her burden. Little did she know, her next operation would set in motion events that would challenge everything she believed in. Sam Archer, his heart racing with excitement, paced outside the OR. He had followed a trail of medical records and suspicious death certificates that led him straight to Dr. Hart. His instincts told him there was more to her than met the eye, and he was determined to uncover the truth. He glanced at his watch, nervously tapping his pen against his leg as he waited for the nurse to emerge. Nurse Liam, a seasoned professional, was as loyal to Dr. Hart as she was observant. As she wheeled the gurney into the OR, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. She had seen the way Dr. Hart had been acting lately, and she knew that something wasn't right. But as she was about to enter the sterile room, she hesitated, torn between her loyalty and her growing suspicion. The patient, a young woman named Sarah, lay unconscious on the operating table. Her vital signs were stable, but her fate hung in the balance. Dr. Hart, her face a mask of concentration, began the delicate procedure to repair Sarah's aortic valve. As she worked, her mind raced with thoughts of the mounting pressure from the hospital administration to explain the recent deaths. She knew that one wrong move could cost Sarah her life, but she also knew that she couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. Meanwhile, Sam Archer waited, his fingers poised over his notebook, ready to document every move. He had promised his editor he would uncover the truth, and he wasn't about to let anything stop him. But as the hours passed, he began to wonder if he was getting closer to the truth or digging himself deeper into a pit of lies. The tension in the air was palpable, and the stakes had never been higher. As Dr. Hart finished the operation, she couldn't shake off the feeling that she had just narrowly escaped something. Something terrible. Nurse Liam turned to Sam, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and fear. "I need to speak with you," she whispered. "It's not what it seems." Sam followed her out of the OR, his heart pounding with anticipation. He had no idea what she was about to tell him, but he knew it would change everything. The hospital corridors seemed to close in on him as he waited for her to speak. The air was thick with secrets, and he could feel the weight of them bearing down on his shoulders. The story of Sarah's operation, and the mysterious deaths that came before it, was about to reach its climax. But as Nurse Liam began to speak, Sam found himself more confused than ever before. "I don't know how to explain this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's like there's a pattern, a thread that connects all of these deaths. But it's not just me. I think the key to solving the mystery lies with Dr. Hart. But the more I learn, the more I wonders if I'm uncovering a scandal or a conspiracy." Sam listened intently, struggling to process her words. He couldn't believe that Dr. Hart, someone he had trusted and admired, could be involved in anything criminal. But the more he listened, the more he began to realize that the truth was far more complicated than he ever imagined. As they continued to talk, they were joined by Dr. Hart, who had been watching them from a discreet distance. The nurse's eyes darted back and forth between them, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. She knew that something was going on, but she wasn't sure whom she could trust. She joined the couple in the passage. "I need to see those records," Sam insisted, his voice firm. "The ones that led you to Dr. Hart. I need to understand what's really happening here." She hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks. She knew that Nurse Liam had informed Sam of the mystery. Then, with a sigh, she nodded. "All right," she said, leading them to her office. "But you have to promise me that you'll handle this delicately. The hospital administration is already breathing down my neck, and I don't want to make things worse." As they sat down in Dr. Hart's office, Sam couldn't help but feel a sense of awe mixed with fear. The walls were adorned with framed degrees and awards, testaments to Dr. Hart's brilliance and dedication. But now, as he looked at her, he saw something else. Fatigue. Fear. And, perhaps, a glimmer of guilt. He knew that the next few moments would determine not only the fate of Sarah, but also the lives of everyone involved. Dr. Hart logged into her computer and began to pull up the records, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Sam leaned in close, his heart pounding with anticipation. The key to solving the mystery was right here, in front of them. But as the files appeared on the screen, Sam felt a chill run down his spine. The pattern was there, all right. But it was not what he had expected. "These records," Sam began. "They don't make any sense. They seem to indicate that Dr. Hart is involved in something, but it's not what you think it is." He looked up at Dr. Hart, his expression one of confusion and concern. "It's like you're being framed. Someone's setting you up." Dr. Hart's face paled as she read through the files. "But why?" she whispered. "I don't understand." Nurse Liam cleared her throat, hesitantly stepping forward. "I've seen some unusual activity in the hospital recently," she began. "Things that didn't seem to add up. I've suspected foul play, but I never imagined it would be this." Her voice trailed off as she struggled to find the words. Dr. Hart nodded, her expression grim. "I see," she said. "Then it's clear what we have to do. We need to dig deeper. Find out who's behind this and why." Together, they began to sift through the records, searching for clues that might lead them to the truth. Hours passed, and their investigation grew more complex and dangerous with each new discovery. But they were determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Sam continued to document everything, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He knew that this story was bigger than any he had ever covered before. It was a tale of deception, betrayal, and a fight for the truth against insurmountable odds. And he was determined to see it through to the end. As the sun began to set, they made a startling discovery. Buried deep within the records was a file that seemed to implicate someone within the hospital administration. Someone high up, with a lot to lose. Sam's heart raced as he looked up at Dr. Hart and Nurse Liam, their expressions a mixture of shock and fear. The truth was closer than they ever imagined, but it was also more dangerous than they could have ever dreamed. They knew that they couldn't trust anyone anymore. The hospital was no longer a safe haven. They needed to get out, to go somewhere they could breathe and think. But where? They couldn't go to the police, not yet. The evidence was still too thin, and they needed more time to gather their thoughts. As they made their way through the deserted corridors, their steps echoing on the linoleum, they knew they were walking a fine line. One wrong move and they'd be caught. But they couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer, that the truth was within reach. They had to keep going, no matter the cost. Outside, the hospital seemed to loom over them like a dark, malevolent presence. The wind whistled through the empty parking lot, carrying with it the distant wail of sirens. Sam's fingers danced across his phone's keyboard, his eyes darting back and forth between the screen and the hospital windows, searching for any sign of movement, any indication that they were being watched. As they made their way to a safe house, a small apartment belonging to one of Dr. Hart's old colleagues, they couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. They knew that the next few hours would be crucial. They needed to gather more evidence, to figure out who they could trust. But most importantly, they needed to find a way to expose the truth, to save Sarah and the others. In the apartment, they set up a makeshift command center, with computers and monitors displaying feeds from hidden cameras they had planted throughout the hospital. They pored over the footage, looking for any sign of the person they suspected was behind it all. But every time they thought they had found something, another camera would reveal something else, and their doubts would return. Nurse Liam paced the room, her mind racing. "We need to find a way to trap them," she said, her voice tense with frustration. We can't just keep playing this cat and mouse game. Dr. Hart nodded, her expression grim. I agree. We need to set up a meeting, some sort of exchange. Then we can catch them in the act. Sam, still sitting at his computer, looked up. And what if they're expecting that? He asked. What if they're ready for it? The others fell silent. The possibility was chilling. They knew that they were walking a razor's edge. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. But they also knew that they couldn't give up. Not now, not when they were so close. Together, they began to formulate a plan. It was risky, reckless even. But they didn't have much of a choice. They had to take the fight to their enemy, and they had to do it soon. Because with each passing hour, more lives were at stake. And they couldn't afford to fail. They knew that they couldn't go to the police just yet. They needed more evidence, and they needed to make sure that their trap would work. So, they decided to reach out to someone they trusted, someone who had access to information they didn't. A former colleague, now working with the FBI. They would need his help if they were going to make this work. Nurse Liam made the call, her heart pounding in her chest as she spoke in hushed tones, revealing their findings and their suspicions. She listened intently as the other end of the line fell silent, and then, finally, spoke. I'll see what I can do, he said, his voice grave. But you need to be careful. Whoever's behind this is smart, and they have a lot to lose. They won't go down without a fight. Dr. Hart nodded, her expression grim. We know, she said. But we have to try. Sam, still sitting at his computer, glanced up at the others, a mixture of determination and fear in his eyes. They were all in this together now, and there was no going back. They had to make sure that Sarah and the others survived, that justice was served. No matter the cost. As they continued to strategize, the hours seemed to pass by like minutes. They pored over every detail, every piece of evidence, trying to find a weakness in their enemy's armor. They knew that they were up against a formidable opponent, but they also knew that they couldn't afford to underestimate themselves. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, their contact at the FBI called back. His news was not what they had hoped for. I'm sorry, but I can't get any clearance for an investigation just yet. The evidence you've provided is compelling, but it's not enough. We need more. The words cut through them like a knife. Dr. Hart sighed, her shoulders slumping. I understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But we can't wait any longer. We have to do something. Nurse Liam nodded in agreement. We have to trust in our plan, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. We'll make them pay for what they've done. Sam looked at them both, determination burning in his eyes. And when this is all over? He asked. What then? Are we going to be able to go back to our lives, knowing what we know? The others exchanged glances. They knew that their lives would never be the same. But they also knew that they couldn't turn back now. They had committed themselves to this fight, and they would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. As they continued to discuss their plan, their contact at the FBI called back. This time, he had news that sent a shiver down their spines. I've managed to get some clearance for an undercover operation, he said. But it's going to be risky. You need to be prepared for the possibility that things might not go according to plan. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on their shoulders. They knew that they couldn't afford to fail. Not this time. They spent the rest of the night going over the details of the operation, making sure that they had thought of everything. As the sun began to rise, they finally felt ready. They set their plan into motion, each of them taking on their assigned roles with determination and courage. They knew that the fate of their loved ones rested on their shoulders, and they wouldn't let them down. Days turned into weeks, and still they waited. The tension was palpable, the air thick with anticipation and fear. They checked in with their contact at the FBI every day, hoping for news of a breakthrough. But there was no sign of their enemy yet. Then, one morning, their contact called with news that sent their hearts racing. "We've caught them," he said, his voice grim. "They're moving the patients. You need to meet us at the rendezvous point." The others exchanged worried glances. They knew that this was it. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no going back. With shaking hands, they prepared themselves for what lay ahead, steeling their resolve as they headed toward the meeting point. As they arrived, they saw the FBI agents waiting for them, their faces grim. "We've got them," their contact said. "But it's not going to be easy. They're well prepared, and they're not going down without a fight." The others nodded, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew that they were in for a battle, but they were determined to see it through. They had come too far, and their loved ones were counting on them. As they waited for the signal to move in, they went over their plan one last time, each of them committing it to memory. They knew that once the fighting started, there would be no time for second-guessing. They were a well-oiled machine, each of them playing a crucial role in the operation's success. The signal came, and they sprang into action. Guns drawn, they stormed the compound where Sarah and the others were being held. The enemy was waiting for them, but they didn't stand a chance against their determined assault. Shouts and gunfire filled the air as they fought their way through the building, room by room. Finally, they reached the holding area. The sight that met their eyes was one they would never forget. Dozens of people, some alive, some barely hanging on, were chained to the walls. Their captors had gone to great lengths to inflict unimaginable pain and suffering upon them. "Sarah!" Dr. Hart shouted, rushing forward. She found her daughter cowering in a corner, her body covered in bruises and cuts. Tears streamed down her face as she clung to Dr. Hart. "It's okay, sweetie," she whispered. "We're here to take you home." Sam found his sister in the same condition, her once beautiful face now a mask of fear and pain. He knelt beside her, taking her trembling hands in his. "You're safe now, sis," he said, his voice steady. "We're going to get you out of here." The FBI agents moved in, arresting the remaining guards and securing the area. As the sounds of battle faded away, a new calm settled over the room. The survivors were taken to the hospital, where they would begin the long road to recovery. As they waited for news of their loved ones' conditions, the group huddled together, their arms around each other for support. They knew that the battle they had fought was only the beginning. There would be legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and a long road to recovery ahead of them. But they also knew that they had faced the worst together, and had emerged stronger for it. The first few days in the hospital were a blur of doctors, nurses, and family members. Sarah and the others were slowly beginning to heal, their physical wounds slowly giving way to the emotional scars that would take much longer to heal. But they were alive, and they were surrounded by the people who loved them most. The group continued to meet daily, sometimes several times a day, to check on their progress and offer words of encouragement. Dr. Hart, Sam, and Nurse Liam took turns sitting with Sarah and the others, holding their hands, listening to their stories, and promising that they would never let anything like this happen to them again. As the days turned into weeks, and then months, they began to see glimpses of the Sarah and the others they had known before. They smiled more often, laughed again, and even began to talk about their hopes for the future. It was a slow process, but it was progress. Eventually, the trial came and went, with the groups sitting side by side in the courtroom, their unwavering support for each other a testament to their unbreakable bond. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Dr. Hart, Sam, Nurse Liam, and the survivors sat together, a united front against the darkness they had faced. The judge's voice echoed through the room as the verdict was delivered. "Guilty on all counts." A wave of relief swept over them, tears of joy and sorrow mingling as they embraced. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the city. They stepped into the light, their faces lifted towards the sky, allowing themselves a moment of peace. The battle was over, but their journey was just beginning. Dr. Hart turned to her companions, her eyes shining with unspoken words. "We've been through the unimaginable," she said, her voice steady. "But we made it. Together." Sam nodded, his arm around his sister who had grown stronger each day. "We're more than survivors," he added. "We're warriors. And we'll always have each other's backs." Nurse Liam smiled, her gaze lingering on the hospital in the distance. "And we'll make sure that what happened never happens again. Not on our watch." They stood there for a long while, the bond between them unbreakable. As they walked away, their steps were light, their spirits lifted. They had faced the worst of humanity, and had come out victorious. The perpetrators were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, but even then, the group knew that justice had only been partially served. The memories of their ordeal would never truly leave them, but they also knew that they had forged a bond that could not be broken. In the years that followed, the group remained close, their lives forever intertwined by the shared experience that had brought them together. They continued to check in on each other, to celebrate birthdays and holidays together, and to support each other through the ups and downs of life. They knew that they were stronger together, and that no matter what challenges the future might hold, they could face it as a family. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it.